So, Jason, we'll get started with the Fast Five. What's your name?
Cal, my name is Jason Schoenfelder.
And, Jason, what do you do?
So I wear a couple of different hats and serve a couple different roles on a day-to-day basis. I work for a company called Beef Northwest Feeders, and I specifically manage a pasture-based cattle finishing operation, primarily finishes cattle for Country Natural Beef, a rancher-based cooperative. In addition to that, my wife and I and her family also run some cows of our own. We have a cow-calf operation kind of scattered out over different parts of Northeast Oregon.
And that answered my next question. Where are you located? So, Northeast Oregon?
Yeah, so Northeast Oregon. So kind of the where I work day to day and the winter grazing operations for our cow herds kind of is in the Columbia Basin, between Hermiston and Boardman, Oregon. And then our summer grazing is in a really cool spot in Northeast Oregon, just outside of Enterprise on the Zumwalt Prairie.
Oh, very good. And you mentioned beef. Is that the only livestock species you all deal with?
Yeah, so me personally in my day job, and then my wife and our operation is strictly beef cattle. My brother-in-law is heavily involved in the sheep industry.
Yes.
Raises sheep in quite a few different environments, but you'd sure want to talk to him about some of the details there.
Yeah. And when did you start grazing animals?
So I grew up around it, Cal. I originally grew up in Southeast Arizona, Cochise County, near the Mexican border and the New Mexico border. And it probably was about 1989 or 1990. I would have been leaving junior high and getting into high school. My dad went to an Allen Savory grazing school.
Oh, yes.
And just went all in on the idea of rotational grazing and more intensive grazing management and holistic management. And, it was interesting. He converted the entire ranch that we had at that time. It was about just under 20,000 acres of deeded and state lease land. But he converted that entire ranch as soon as he got back from that school, started making plans, converted the ranch into the original Allen Savory design of rotational grazing, the cell grazing, the paddock grazing. And so I was pretty young and had been around that thought process for most of my career in my adult life.
Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Cal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you. Calling all ranchers, if you're looking to optimize your grazing operation and boost your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. The Noble approach to education pairs their own in-field research with the expertise of ranch managers and advisors to find practical solutions to your unique challenges. Now is the time to register for one of their June in-person courses. Noble will be in Jefferson City for Noble Grazing Essentials, June 4th through 6th. In Kansas City for Noble Profitability Essentials, June 11th through 12th. And in Fredericksburg, Texas for Business of Grazing, June 24th through 26th. Noble Research Institute ensures that every insight they share has been tested in real-world conditions, giving you solutions that work, not just theories. Visit noble.org today to learn more about these courses or to register. For 10 seconds about the farm, last week's episode I was talking about moving my cows to ultra-high density grazing. And I say moving my cows, moving my dad's cows to that. My cows are used to daily moves. Dad's cows, we have permanent paddocks here on his place, so they're not used to daily moves. However, I've got them running with my cows doing daily moves and trying to increase that density. I'm not near where I want to be, but the cows are respecting the electric fence now. Step 1 complete. Except they still complain and they walk. They do not like that confined area. So we'll see how it goes. It's been really wet, so I've made paddocks larger than I'd like because I don't want them plugging it up too much. I've got one paddock I made a little small, and they plugged it pretty bad. So it's a journey. We'll see how it goes, and I'll keep you informed. Also, I'm thinking I'll record some videos for YouTube if you want to see what I'm doing. When I do that, I'll let you know on the podcast. For 10 seconds about the podcast, if you're not a member of the Grazing Grass community on Facebook, jump over to Facebook, search for Grazing Grass Community, and request to join. And when you request to join, if you just click join and don't answer any questions, it automatically gets deleted or denied. So make sure you answer those questions just a little bit. They're really simple. Put something in there. That way I can see it and improve it. I look forward to talking to you over there. And let's get back to Jason. When your dad came back from that Allen Savory course conference, did that strike you as odd, or were you at the time thinking, hey, this kind of makes sense?
It wasn't something I really knew a lot about, but just even at a fairly young age, I was pretty interested in cattle and grazing and livestock systems. But the idea of supporting rangeland health to better produce a product and better manage the landscape over a longer term. Back then, sustainability wasn't even really a word, but you were trying to build a business plan around a grazing operation to last year over year, generation over generation. So I thought that part was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Then when you got finished with high school, what did you decide to go do?
Yeah, so I went to college at the University of Arizona. Like any kid growing up on a ranch, I think a lot of people can relate. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I bounced around a little bit, and it took me a while to get through my college career, but ultimately decided to just really like the cattle industry. And as an industry as a whole, I like the grazing part of it. I like the cow-calf. I like the business side of it. I was really interested in the marketing and really interested just in the fact that ultimately we're converting grass into protein that's in a system that's healthy and wholesome, and it's pretty tasty too. So I just always had that idea or that goal to somehow work my career into a place where I was involved in the industry from conception to dinner plate if the opportunity ever arose.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So you're in Arizona. Now you're in Oregon. Was that a straight line to get to Oregon?
No, that was a pretty jagged line. We bounced around quite a bit. I was fortunate enough later in my college career to do an internship at the King Ranch. And of course, that was in the years before the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management was developed. So I'm pretty fortunate to see the operations there on a big historic ranch. That was pretty neat. A different environment than I'd ever been in. And just see how cattle interacted with the environment and what it took to manage under those types of rangeland conditions. After I got out of college, I went back to South Texas, right near the King Ranch. I helped manage a registered beefmaster cow herd for the McAllen family. Again, different environment, highly susceptible to drought, impacted by big fluctuations in seasonal rainfall. Had to figure out how to implement management systems that could best utilize grass during the growing season and the wet seasons, but then conserve grazing head days and grazing availability throughout the year. So did that for a couple of years, had an opportunity to work with my family, fairly large scale cow-calf operation, some stocker operation that was really pretty scattered from central and east Texas up into central and Oklahoma. So got the opportunity to work over a number of different environments. Again, she tried to manage grass to maximize, or I guess really optimize, the production of beef. So some of those central Texas and Oklahoma properties were super intensive, utilized commercial fertilizers, lots of mechanical brush control, lots of chemical brush control, and things like that. But just gave me a lot of experience, and there was a number of different ways to manage the landscape. And I always focused and was pulled towards ways that were more economically beneficial, more sustainable over the long term, especially as it related to the land itself, but also the economics of the business. A lot of this stuff we do every day is a lot of fun, and it's we do a lot of things for the right reason, but it's really important to me that we focus on the economic benefits and that we're able to build a business out of it and maintain some of these ranches over generations.
Right. I completely concur. There's certain practices that we don't do, but we used to do.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but when you really start penciling them, we were doing them for the aesthetic aspect of it rather than the profitability aspect of it.
That's correct.
Uh, And it's so easy to get wrapped into that. In
Yeah.
fact, I've got one lease property. It's an ongoing conversation because they would like it mowed. They want it to look like manicured.
Right.
It's not going to look that way when I'm grazing cows on it.
Right. Right.
Unless I overgraze it, and we don't want to do that because that's hurting the land. But
Yeah.
now going through, so you mentioned this a few times. Going from southeast Arizona, South Texas, into north central Texas, into Oklahoma. That's a wide variety. In going through that, what did you take away from that and those different experiences that now, when you're in Oregon, you're using?
Yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway for me was that I used to think that, especially growing up in Southeast Arizona, I used to think that, well, rainfall's your biggest limiting factor. So if you just go somewhere where it rained, life would be easy, cows would be fat. And I think the biggest takeaway is that every environment has its own management challenges. More rainfall can also mean more noxious weeds, can be more brush encroachment, can mean poor quality forages that have to be supplemented differently or at least managed differently to take advantage of the nutrition that's out there on the landscape available for livestock production. So, I think just learning to be adaptable to environments, but then understanding that, and I don't want to oversimplify this, and listeners might take this the wrong way, but at the end of the day, grass is grass, forage is forage, cattle are cattle. Matching those resources to the livestock you run on that, or vice versa, matching the cattle to the landscape. At the end of the day, we're just ultimately trying to produce pounds of protein out of a product or out of a feed stuff that humans wouldn't enjoy eating and couldn't really be very, very effective consuming.
I'm going to pare down what you said. You made it pretty short, but to me, what I hear you saying is we need to get out of the way of nature.
Yeah,
Cows are made to graze grass. Grass is out there. Let's let them do it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you managed different jobs in these areas. After that, is that when you headed towards the northeast? To the northwest.
Northwest. Yeah. Yeah. So, being a one-man show and an entrepreneur kind of mindset, kind of operation in 2015. We all know what the cattle market went through end of 2014 and 2015. One thing I'm pretty self-aware with is the fact that I'm probably not the best market risk manager or financial risk manager, as some of those cattle we were owning in a stocker operation that I was taking care of at that time, profitability was good, but it required more equity in that 2015 time frame to replace those stockers and those backgrounder cattle. Thought it might be a good idea for me to look for, quote unquote, a real job. Finally, I found an opportunity up here with Beef Northwest Feeders up here in Northeast Oregon. Took an opportunity to submit a resume and came up here, interviewed with the powers that be and the folks that run this company day to day. And it was just a good click. It was a fit right from day one. Kind of made my mind up that if I'm going to transition out of being my own boss to potentially working in a corporate commercial cattle feeding company, that these were the type of people I really wanted to be around. And lucky for me, they saw some potential in me, offered me a job, and fast forward to 2025 here in August, I'll have been here 10 years.
Oh, yes. Yeah. When you went up there, Was it more the conventional feedlot at that time?
No, so that was one of the really intriguing factors to me. Obviously, Beef Northwest Feeders is a large commercial cattle feeding company, very strong, very strong footprint in that piece of the industry. But one of the things I saw even when I interviewed is at the time, Beef Northwest Feeders had a very strong relationship with Country Natural Beef and was finishing cattle for the Country Natural Beef member ranchers on this operation that I manage today. It's called Northwest Pasture Beef. It was originally started. Country Natural Beef needed an operation to meet GAP step level 4 standards. I don't know if you're familiar with GAP at all.
I think we should cover it. I'll be completely transparent here. The only reason I'm familiar with it is I listened to a podcast from 2020 that some people from Country Natural Beef was on, and they were talking about it. So I had to look it up. So I suspect most of my listeners are not familiar with it, or maybe they are. Maybe they're smarter than me. But go ahead and explain what that is.
Yeah, so GAP, GAP stands for Global Animal Partnership. And that was started originally as an ask or as a project by Whole Foods Markets. If you're familiar with the really high end grocery store chain, Whole Foods customers had a big ask for more information on how the animal-based proteins that they were offering, how they were produced. And the ask was to build a set of animal welfare standards that could be third-party audited and really verified. And what it boils down to is things like conventional feedlots, things like certain animal handling practices, things like adding implants, different hormones, feeding ionophores to cattle. Whole Foods customers really sent a big signal to drive away from some of those technologies that were used widespread in the industry. So GAP is based on different, they call them step levels. And what the GAP step level 4, the biggest differentiator there is letting cattle live or be in a production system that is a non-confinement system.
And I believe there's 5 steps. So step 4, you're close to all their recommendations, but not quite all the way there, but step 4.
Yeah. So on the beef side of it, there's different step levels and there's different standards for all animal protein. Products. But in the beef world, there's really only step 1. Then it kind of jumps to step 4. Then you have step 5 and 5 plus. Step 1 allows for conventional type feed yards, but has some stipulations for space, behavioral enhancements, so things like back scratchers and things like that within the pens. Step 4 brings into the pasture-based non-confinement system, and that's the space we operate in today. Step 5 accounts for some standards around not dehorning cattle, not physically altering the animal. So earmarks, ear tags, branding, castration. And there is a step level 5 plus. We're not part of that, of the 5 or the 5 plus, but I believe the 5 plus goes as far to animals are born, raised, and harvested on the ranch or farm of origin. So then they never step foot on a truck. They never move, things like that.
Yeah. Which step 4 seems to be a high up on that, because step 5, that physical alteration of an animal, that's an industry thing that would be really tough to achieve. I think when you're working with member ranches.
Yeah. So step 4 takes into account both. It requires a pasture-based system to meet the animal welfare standard, but it also takes into account just about everything that we could or should be doing as producers. Yes, we are doing this to meet some customer demands and some customer needs, and there is a premium in the market available for that. But at the end of the day, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good feeling to go to sleep at night that you can operate within this system, and you're not going to be caught. You'd never be caught up in any sort of issue that related to animal welfare. Yeah.
Are there other feeders that are step 4 as well?
So there are a couple other feeders in the U.S. There's a couple other operations that specifically feed cattle for country natural beef, and I work with some of those producers fairly closely. And I think there are a couple other gap step level 4 operations around the country. I believe there's actually one in the Northeast, maybe up in Maine. So totally different environment. Winters get to the point where it does require housing and some things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Fortunately, we're in a pretty unique environment where I am in Northeast Oregon, where we're fairly arid, don't have to deal with mud. Winters are typically fairly moderate and temperate, so it's a pretty good place to raise cattle.
Are you on your pasture in Northeast Oregon? And to be honest, I'm not super familiar with the Pacific Northwest up there, but I know when you're talking about the east half of Oregon and Washington, very different than the west half.
Right,
And
right.
arid, like you said. For ranchers I've talked to in Idaho and in that area, they use a lot of irrigated ground. Again, Jason.
So for this finishing operation, we're 100% irrigated ground, center pivot irrigated, and we're focused on utilizing a combination of permanent pastures, cover crop, and then crop aftermath to provide the pasture space that we operate on for this program.
I don't know that you answered this, and maybe you did. So when you went there, did they have this pasture division in, and were they doing that, or that was something created after you got there?
No, so it had been developed specifically for country natural beef several years prior to me coming to work for Beef Northwest. I've had the opportunity to expand the operation a little bit while I've been here, and we've also had the opportunity to kind of build out the scope of this. We had a lot of questions, utilizing irrigation water, utilizing fairly high value farm ground just to provide I shouldn't say it that way, but in order to provide a comfortable space for cattle to be raised in, one of our questions was, is that the best use of the resource?
Oh, yeah.
So building out crop rotation programs, utilizing cover cropping plans, rotating permanent pastures in and out of crop production at different times with irrigation has allowed us to utilize the land and the water resource for a little more than just running cattle on it.
Oh, yeah. Let's dive in deeper into that pasture finishing program. You mentioned you're running some crops, you're rotating some cows on there. Are you grazing annuals with all those animals, or do you have some permanent pasture? What's your forage situation look like?
Yeah, so it'd be a combination of really all the above, Cal, and with what we want to try to do and experiment with as we move forward, the sky's the limit. So today, our permanent pasture would be typically a grass mix. Try to find a mixture of cool season perennial grasses, warm season perennial grasses. Typically, when we replant a pasture or we maybe bring a new circle in, we'll use a triticale or a ryegrass as almost a nurse crop. As we try to establish those more permanent perennial grasses, we use a lot of one of the things that we do is we take a field that's been in alfalfa hay production for a number of years, and that stand's starting to go out or starting to wear out just a little bit. That's an awesome place to start with in this grazing rotation. Graze that alfalfa for a little bit, come back in with a grass mix that we can interseed or overseed. We've got a lot of goals around reducing tillage, minimizing tillage, reducing fertilizer usage, or eliminating fertilizer usage altogether is the ultimate goal.
Right.
Yeah. We've tried some things in the past. If you know anything about farming and especially irrigated farming on high value ground, kochia is kind of a bad word. We planted several years ago, we actually planted some forage kochia, and I think some of the farmers were looked at us side-eyed, but it's
Oh,
fast
yeah.
growing, kept the ground together, kept the ground covered. Cattle did well on it. Yep.
Yeah. Very good. Then when I think about a feedlot, and then when I take a step further and I think about a pasture-based finishing program,
Yeah.
in my mind, we have some farms around here, and they take 5 acres about, and they put a feed bunk in there, a shade cloth, and those cows are just put in that 5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And while that gets them on pasture, and they may be able to claim it's pasture-based, to me, that seems like they're not doing quite enough to really take care of the land.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
How are you all managing your cattle in that system?
yeah. So today it's a really unique system. We are feeding these cattle fairly high energy diet. It's all natural, no hormones, no ionophores, no implants in the cattle, and no other feed additives. You know, our customer essentially demands a very, very high quality beef product at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah.
So the product we sell is choice or better, and we have to produce that day in or week in, week out for our customers. So we're feeding a fairly high energy diet. As a feed yard manager, I know those cattle are eating some of the forage and consuming some of the grass that's out on the pasture. We don't
Right.
really account for that as part of the diet very
Oh,
much.
okay.
We can see differences in intakes as far as the amount of feed per head per day that cattle consume out of the feed bunk. There is an interaction that happens there that we really watch closely from a management standpoint. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is maintain that stand of forage that's out there in the pasture. We want to minimize bare ground every chance we
Yes.
can. We want to increase living roots out there on the landscape. We'd like to diversify species of vegetative ground cover that's out there. And so what we're doing is we're rotating these cattle relatively quickly. Today it's on about a 5 to 10 day rotation. Our goal is
Oh, okay. Yeah.
to let every paddock or pasture rest a minimum of 21 days during the growing season throughout the year. So if you think about hay production, you know, we're trying to make sure we let that grass have a chance to grow, continue to put those roots down below the soil surface, fill in any areas where we have high cattle traffic impact, and go from there. Yep.
Are you all able to have feed bunks in every rotation you're going through? Or do you have some kind of portable system for that?
So we use a couple of different styles of feed bunks, but we've got enough feed bunks to where we have a rotation plan, and we're essentially leapfrogging feed bunks and water
Oh, yeah.
infrastructure ahead of the cattle. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Water's always a limiting factor. Of course, when you have irrigated water, that kind of negates some of that, I would
Right.
assume.
Right.
Yeah. It's in the feed bunks. With them getting the feed on there, you grain finish them for a high-end product going to Whole Foods or wherever it's going with that. Are you finding customers are saying they're good with grain finish that way? Or are you getting some pushback saying they want grass finish? Or does it matter to the high-end customer? Or are they just worried about that piece of meat being a quality product?
Yeah. So I think it does matter to the consumer. Ultimately, the consumer wants to feel good about the product they're purchasing and how it was
Yes.
raised. But the customer today wants a really good eating experience. You know, I've been on the edges of different grass-fed markets, and I'm going to be the last guy to tell you one's better than the other. I'm going to tell you, do what works best for your operation, that keeps you economically relevant, that helps you leave your land, your ranch to your children or future generations. Whatever works. The cool thing about Country Natural Beef and the fact that it's a big co-op of a bunch of different ranchers. I probably have right at 40 different cattle feeding customers here at Northwest Pasture Beef today that are all CNB member ranches. There's about 100 members in the Country Natural Beef Cooperative as it stands today. There's about 61 or 2,000 head of cattle projected to go through the program this fiscal year for the cooperative. So it's a big scope, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the cool thing about it is this allows ranchers to do what they do best at home, focus on their landscape, focus on their livestock, focus on their family. But it also, this program here in this facility allows the co-op to produce a very consistent product that's extremely high quality week in, week out throughout the year that allows the cooperative to attract a very special customer that's very appreciative of the product we produce.
I think you hit on a few points there that's so important. Consistency. The consumer wants to know that when they buy that product, they want it to be like last week's.
Yes. Yep.
Or a month ago, 6 months ago. They want that consistency. The other thing you mentioned, grass-fed, grain finish, whatever it is, whatever is working for you, whatever you've developed your market for, have at it.
Get
This
after
is
it.
where
Yes,
we're
sir.
excelling.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So when you let's change the focus just a little bit. We still want to talk about that, but when you're talking about you're bringing those animals in from member ranches, are you requesting member ranches to use certain breeds? Are you requesting certain practices in place for those animals to come to you?
Yeah, so Country Natural Beef tries to outline some standard expectations of cattle that are coming into the finishing facility. There's nothing breed specific. I mean, ultimately, we want these ranches to be in business for generations. I mean, Country Natural Beef members cover Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, Colorado. There's several in Montana. I don't know if I mentioned Colorado, but there's several in Colorado, several in Arizona. Cover, I think it's just over 1.5, 1.6 million acres of landscape scattered across Rockies through the Intermountain West, the Great Basin, all the way to the Pacific Coast. So when it comes to breed specificity, there's no ask there. We do need cattle that have the genetic potential to grade USDA choice or better. And we can manage some of that with days on feed in the finishing process. But ultimately, I think Country Natural Beef really leans hard back to the rancher, saying, if you want to be a part of this co-op, at the very least, run a cow that fits your environment and can help your ranch be profitable and efficient on the cow-calf side.
Do you provide data back to the rancher on how their calves performed and dressed out so that they can make management decisions on their end?
Yeah, so there's a big data set that's been collected for going on 25, maybe close to 30 years. But ultimately, if a member rancher sends cattle here to Northwest Pasture Beef, they'll get the feedlot performance. So average daily gain, dry matter feed conversion, the cost of gain, any health outcomes as it relates to performance of the cattle in the feed yard. And then through the co-op, ranchers also get all the carcass data back. So USDA quality grade, yield grades, back fat thickness, ribeye areas, yield and dressing percentages. They get all of that back. So if a rancher has the data management systems at home, and I mean, ultimately a rancher could tailor design a cow herd that was effective on the landscape, efficient on their ranch, reproductively efficient, feed efficient, and have really good carcass quality for the consumer.
Are you seeing with the ranches you all work with, are they long-term agreements? For as long as you've been doing it, do you have some ranches that's been in it the whole time?
Yeah. So I get to feed cattle for the entire spectrum, right? I get to feed cattle for some of the founding member ranchers of Country Natural Beef.
Oh, yes.
All the way down to somebody that has 30 head of cows on a smaller operation, and they love the idea of getting involved with this and being able to manage their ranch and take out some of the marketing headaches and then generate a premium for their cattle. So it's everything in between. We've got
Oh, yes.
3,000 plus head producers down to 30 head producers.
Are y'all maintaining your numbers, or are y'all looking to grow and maybe increase number of ranches?
Yeah, so we'd love to grow. We'd love to increase the number of ranches. There's a very big demand for the end product. There's a huge demand for the end product today. Obviously, it's not just a turnkey. It's not a turnkey project, because ranchers participate through the co-op, retain ownership through the feeding phase, and they're selling hot carcass weight on the rail at the packing plant to the meat company.
Oh, okay.
And then they have an equity stake in the meat company and get paid dividends on Country Natural Beef's profit and losses as a meat company. So for a rancher to get involved, there are some financial ramifications and cash flow ramifications. If you're historically a calf seller, or you wean calves and background calves at home and keep them till they're yearlings, there's some things to think about as you go into becoming a retained ownership finished feeder seller.
Oh,
But there's lots of resources out there to help with that. The co-op, I know, has worked with different financial institutions to try to figure out how to do that. We can jump into this Grazewell topic, but there's some funding through Grazewell that could potentially help ranchers do some projects at the ranch that would help offset some things in order to participate in the system.
oh, yeah. Yeah. One last question before we kind of jump into Grazewell
Yeah.
and find out more about that. Someone sends you calves and you're finishing them out. What happens to the ones who don't grade as high as you need them to?
Yeah, so something that grades less than a USDA choice, that carcass would be sold to the packing plant. We work with a couple of large commercial packing plants on it's essentially a large scale agreement, just like you would do with your local packing house down the road. They harvest the animal, they process it. Country Natural Beef's inventory and marketing team submits an order for how that carcass needs to be broke down into what cuts, how it needs to be boxed, and how it needs to be shipped. So something that was out of spec, the rancher is still going to get the market price for that week for whatever that grade or that class of carcass would be.
Right. It's not the premium for the premium product,
Yeah.
but they're getting
Yeah.
market value for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting. I know for a number of years we sold to a label that wanted certain breeding, and they were coming quite a ways for three of us grouped together so we would have a load of calves.
Right.
And they decided it was too far to come just for us three.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but we enjoyed that. But one thing that was very different about that program was we were selling the calves to them.
Yeah.
We weren't retaining ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I can see a lot of value to that retain ownership, because that really means how those calves perform affects the rancher's pocketbook, and it makes them really conscious of those carcass traits and what they're wanting, or to provide that premium product to you.
And it's as close to a vertically integrated program as I think we have in the beef industry. So if I just put my rancher hat on and I've worked my tail off on building a maternal, reproductive efficient cow that produces heavy weaning weight calves that are going to perform well and stay healthy in the feedlot, and then produce a high quality carcass for the consumer, and I can capitalize on all that investment I put into building that calf through every segment of the chain, I think there's opportunity there.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah.
At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. Something you mentioned earlier, Jason, was the Grazewell program.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, till I started researching for this episode, I wasn't familiar with Grazewells at all. So I'm going to assume a fair number of my listeners aren't either. So what is the Grazewell program?
Yeah, so it's a brand new program, and I'll give you just a little bit of the origin story behind it.
Oh,
so go back to the Whole Foods model years and years ago. Whole Foods customers said, "Hey, we want to know a little bit about how the animals that are going into these protein products, how they're raised and cared for throughout the production cycle." The consumer has since expanded that question to how do these production systems affect the land? How do they affect water resources?
Yes.
How do they affect air quality? How do they relate to different sustainability practices? And then the new jargon is regenerative agriculture, right?
Yes. Right.
So Grazewell essentially is a program that takes into account how we utilize regenerative ag practices across ranches, across landscape, and in the finishing system to offer a premium product to consumers. And Country Natural Beef is working on getting this to be an accredited, third-party audited set of standards for ranchers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So did Grazewell, who developed Grazewell? I mean, and is that Northwest Feeders? Is it an outside entity? Or is it a combination thereof?
No, so Country Natural Beef developed is developing the Grazewell label.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of coined the term Grazewell. There are several outside technical service providers that have helped generate data, what practices can be implemented on the landscape that are truly regenerative type practices that can have an impact on the landscape and the soil and the air and the water and those kind of things. The next step to this is have one of those technical service providers provide an accreditation and then and then bring in a third party auditing body that would then provide some outside hard concrete verification that yes, ranchers in this program are implementing these practices on the landscape. We're not trying to make this outcome based. Then nobody's saying as a rancher, thou shalt move soil carbon from soil organic matter from 0.8% to 2% or anything like that. Trying to change soil organic matter is going to be a lifetime process.
Yes.
And if you move it a very, very small increment, that'd be a huge win for anybody, right?
Right.
But are we implementing the practices that have shown to increase soil organic matter, improve water infiltration, reduce bare ground cover, maintain more living root mass below the soil surface? Are we keeping more vegetative organic matter on the soil surface, whether that be dormant feed, growing ground cover, litter, things like that eventually become soil organic matter?
With the Grazewell accreditation, is that something that each member ranch selling into Country Natural Beef is expected to have?
Yeah, that's correct. Every member ranch would have that, and then any ranch that sells cattle into the program whether it's to a member ranch, would have to verify that they participate this through an affidavit process. Yeah.
So Grazewell is available for everyone.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
And it's something that Country Natural Beef is utilizing for their member ranches, but it's out there for other people as well.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. And when we look at this, is it just pasture land, or do you get into crop rotations as well? How's Grazewell set up?
Yeah, so all of the above. So take our little ranch on the Zumwalt Prairie. We pick some monitoring sites, measuring soil carbon content. We're measuring water infiltration. We're measuring bare ground cover. We're doing some transects and counting the species within each monitoring site.
Yes.
We're setting some long-term goals. So goals that we would measure in 5-year increments to see how our grazing management practices may influence change over time. So you take a model like that back to the finishing area, the finishing facility. Again, we're looking at soil microbial activity, looking at water infiltration, looking at diversity of species of vegetation. I've got some elk and some deer and some waterfowl that live here at the feed yard or use the feed yard from time to time. We call it a feed yard. It looks like a big irrigated farm that you'd have a bunch of cattle on. But
yeah,
we're really close to the Columbia River here where the finishing facility I manage is. What are we doing with soil nutrient loads? I mean, we really want to look at some things like we finish cattle on a certain area of land. Can we plant a feed or a forage or a grain crop in behind those cattle? Can we harvest that, put that back into the rations and finish cattle? Some of those longer term, more closed loop type systems really play well into things we're trying to do and things we're trying to investigate.
Are there similar programs out there like Grazewell?
I don't think there is anything quite like Grazewell out there. There's some different regenerative ag label claims that are accredited and audited and measured. But the thing about Grazewell is it's designed to meet ranchers and producers where they are in their journey to produce a product utilizing some regenerative practices.
So if someone's interested in the Grazewell program, what should they do?
Contact Country Natural Beef first and foremost. You can find Country Natural Beef online, Google it. We have a compliance coordinator that would be extremely knowledgeable. There's a woman named Valerie Rasmussen that is really focused on helping develop the Grazewell label and the label claim. Arvid Carlson would be the production manager for the live cattle supply. So he works closely with ranchers on helping them get the different certifications and accreditations they need to have their cattle qualify for the program. Yeah, if folks reached out to me, I can help them get into contact with the people they need to talk to. Yeah.
Oh, very good. And I may ask that question a little prematurely. On Grazewell, you mentioned that's a newer program, but I assume that's similar to the management practices you all have had your ranches do for a while.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of this whole thing, Cal. A lot of ranches were implementing different holistic management practices, different grazing management practices that just, if you looked at what some of the regenerative claims required, well, most of us were already doing it out of the ranches.
Oh, yeah.
We needed to figure out how to apply it to a finishing space, but we were already doing it. There was consumer demand. As a producer, how can we capitalize on that? How could we achieve or realize a market premium for that product?
Right. It gives a way to give that confidence to the consumer.
Yes.
That's going through this program, some assurance to them.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, we've mentioned throughout this Country Natural Beef, and we've mentioned Whole Foods. Is that the only place we're finding country natural beef?
No, I mean, Whole Foods would be the largest customer of country natural beef, but there's a number of different regional grocery stores, especially in the Pacific Northwest, Town and Country Market, PCC food co-ops. Chipotle ends up with I don't believe Country Natural Beef is an exclusive provider, but Chipotle buys a lot of product.
Oh, yeah.
Work with a company that's part of the Cisco food service division called Fulton's in the Portland area, working more in the food service side of things.
Oh, yeah.
I guess country natural beef would be a fairly regional label just because most of the all of the feeding and packing space is up here in the Pacific Northwest, but it's fairly widespread. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Very good. Now, Jason, we ran through a lot.
Yeah.
We talked about your journey. We hit on country natural beef. We hit on Grazewell. We hit on Northwest feeders. I know I didn't cover everything, but is there some things you'd like to bring up? You're like, I wish he'd asked me about this.
I think the only thing I'd say is when it comes to a system like Grazewell, or it comes to managing your ranch, most people are out there are implementing these practices and doing things just because it's the right thing to do. The cool thing about country natural beef is it allows ranchers a space to do what they think's right for their landscape, right for their ranch at home, right for their cow herd, right for the future of their businesses and their families. But country natural beef offers a space for those individual ranchers to generate a premium for the product that they're going to sell anyway.
Yeah, and I really like that. A lot of times on our podcast, we're talking about direct to consumer.
Yeah.
It gets brought up a lot, but not everyone wants to do direct to consumer.
Yeah.
I don't think that's really my strengths. We just sell through the sell barn for the most part. We do a little bit of direct consumer, and we're going to try and grow that. But when I think about my skill set, that's not where I think my skill set excels.
Yeah.
So having a program like Country Natural Beef, I think would be really nice for my area.
Yeah, and you touched on something there, Cal, that I think is really important. Most of us as ranchers or just as people, there's one or two areas that we can really excel in, we can be good at. And if I think about the Country Natural Beef, the makeup of the membership of Country Natural Beef, there are ranchers that are really good range managers. There are ranchers that are really good at managing the genetics of their cow herd and building a cow that fits their environment, that produces a calf that's really successful in the feeding space and produces a carcass really demanded by consumers. There's ranchers that have mastered succession planning and have kept highly valuable landscapes within the family for multiple generations. There's ranchers that are good at market risk management. There's good ranchers that are good at drought mitigation plans, but very few of us are good at all of that, and then good at marketing direct to consumer, managing inventory, and all the things that have to go along with that.
Yeah, I can look in the mirror and see that.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, it is time for our famous 4 questions, same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass-related book or resource?
Okay, I'm going to go off the rails with this. I'm going to give you 2 different books. Cool. And I don't know that they directly relate to grazing grass or managing landscapes, but there's a book called Cattle Kingdom by Chris Knowlton that talks about essentially the rise and fall of the United States cattle industry from about mid 1860s up through about, what they called the big freeze or the big die-off in the late 1870s. But it takes into account, and I think it's a pretty good story, and I think it's fairly accurate what it talks about, how we removed buffalo from the western landscape in the U.S. We overgrazed some ground in that time frame. We expanded the cattle industry. We put up barbed wire fences. We impacted the landscape of the Western United States in that era. And I think it's just a good reminder that we can always learn how to do better. And when we know better, we do better. The other book is called Cadillac Desert, that talks about the era of the Bureau of Reclamation developing water resources in the Western United States. And I think that applies somewhat for a guy that is grown up in agriculture, loves the land, focused on doing better when it comes to conserving and managing resources down the road. I think that Cadillac Desert book gives a lot of insight about how water resources were developed in the West, how they were managed, and how we're going to have to think about managing water resources going forward.
Oh, yeah. It's just going to become more and more important.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to tell you right now, Jason, my wife's not going to be real happy with you because you just introduced me to 2 books that I'm thinking I need to get and read.
That Cadillac Desert is about a 20-hour read if you listen to it on Audible. So,
oh, yes.
Yeah, there you go. It's pretty in depth.
I have been listening to more books on audio. It's a tough call for me because I like reading, but just having the time to do it all.
Yeah.
Having audiobooks have been really nice. And then, of course, everyone should be listening to this podcast. So,
I'd say this podcast probably goes in that resource of read or listen to grazing resources, right, Cal?
Right, exactly. I assume when I ask that question, that's everyone's first choice, but they just really hate to plug the podcast more.
Well, have me back in 6 months or a year, and I'll do that for you.
Oh, okay. There we go. Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the ranch?
Again, not a conventional tool and not something that someone thinks about, but your notebook. Keeping track of what you're doing and when, making notes, making observations. At the end of the day, we can make all kinds of plans. We can build grazing plans that are as simple or as elaborate as possible, as a guy can possibly dream of. We can talk about all these different management practices we want to use to influence the landscape or try to improve our plan. But if you don't have a way of tracking that and monitoring that, you're just not going to know where progress is. Right. The ranch, my family, my wife and her family operate. From the day they took over, I've got a bookshelf in a closet in my house that has probably 30 3-inch 3-ring binders, rangeland monitoring and grazing utilization, riparian improvement projects, fencing projects, water improvement projects, reseeding of native grounds, spraying and management of invasive annual grasses. But that's been going on for about 16 years. And, and we've just got volumes and volumes and volumes of history and data. I don't know how we're going to use it. I don't know how we're going to implement that someday, but I just think having that data is extremely valuable.
I completely agree. And I'm going to be, that's an area I need to do a better job on. Oh, yeah. That's a really important area. Our third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
Somebody that's just getting started in grazing or maybe trying to really improve, I think you need to know where your baseline is. Where are you starting and what are your goals? I think we need to think about those goals longer term. Most of us, whether it's, and you say getting started, whether we're just getting in the industry, whether we just leased a new ranch, whether we started a new project somewhere, it's really easy to get that first grazing rotation figured out. It's really easy to get that first season or that first year figured out. But what do we want to do long term? Big picture, how are we going to relate to this landscape? What inputs can we afford to put into it? How does that affect what that landscape offers back to us? And is it repeatable year over year, season over season?
Yes. I think that's excellent advice and so great, because when we get started, that motivation is at the highest point.
Yep.
And you're
Yep.
just gun ho ready to go. But there becomes days in there, and maybe longer in days, but we'll call it days for right now, that motivation is not going to get you through. You've got to have this vision, your goals for what you're doing long term for you to go out there every day and do that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to just get a little bit excited for the failures. Hopefully the failures aren't detrimental to the landscape long term, but we're going to do things that aren't going to work. Mother Nature's not always going to cooperate when it comes to rainfall, but and that's maybe almost it may be some sort of disorder that I have, but it's almost as exciting to fail just a little bit as it is to do something extremely successful.
Well, whenever you are successful versus the time you're failing, or those projects you were successful in versus those projects you failed in, when you look back at them, what times did you learn the most? And I would have to say it's your failures.
Those are the ones you remember. Those
are
the ones you remember for sure.
Your successes, you're just going on and it's looking good. Like I like to say, everyone's a good grass manager and maid in my area.
Yeah, for sure.
It's when you start hitting those speed bumps and things aren't going as good as you planned that you really learn and become better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jason, to wrap up our famous four, where can others find out more about you, more about Country Natural Beef, and more about Beef Northwest Feeders?
Yeah, so Beef Northwest Feeders, Northwest Pasture Beef, has a website, beefnw.com. You can find out more about the company there. Country Natural Beef, I believe it's countrynaturalbeef.com, has a website. There's contact links there to get a hold of Country Natural Beef Management. There's some social media channels relating to Country Natural Beef and Beef Northwest. There's usually some pretty cool things there that get shared. I'm not the marketing guy for any of those entities or the PR guy, so I don't have all that memorized. But yeah, Google Country Natural Beef, plug Beef Northwest Feeders into a search engine. I guess if you Googled me and wanted to try to find me, I don't know what I'd help you with, but feel free to reach out. Yeah.
And I'll do some of that Googling for the listeners and put it in our show notes, make it easy for them if they're wanting more information.
Awesome.
Yeah. And to wrap up for today, Jason, do you have a question for me?
I think the only question I'd have for you is, where do you see this podcast going? Where do you see the impact in the environment? And maybe tell us just a little bit about your passion for why you're doing this.
When I think about this podcast and where I want it to go and why we're doing this, it's to help the younger me. When I was trying to figure this out, when I first started trying to do rotational grazing, electric fencing, it was awful. In fact, we put that stuff up and didn't come back to it for a number of years because the electric fence just did not work and we couldn't contain animals. And that's really just the nuts and bolts portion of it. But just overall doing a better job. I want to do a better job, but I needed there's not a recipe out there that works for us. But sometimes we need a recipe to kind of get started. And what I envision the podcast is that we're sharing these journeys and people relate to them here. And then they're like, oh, I can do that. And sometimes we almost share recipes. There's sometimes on the episode we talk about how high the poly wire is or what you're shooting for, how far between posts, how far posts are apart. Some of those real basic stuff that really in the end, it just depends. But to get started, sometimes that's a holdup for people.
Right.
And we just want them to take that next step. So we're hoping by sharing these stories, they cause the listener to take their next step for their journey. And the goal with the podcast is that we share stories from all genres, from all sizes, from all places. Because wherever you are, you can do something. In fact, there's an episode coming out pretty soon, and the person got started in downtown or in a rather large city, and they were able to do some pasture poultry.
Yeah.
They're getting started where they are. Some of us grow up on large ranches. We can start there. But some of us don't have that. Some of us have medium size or smaller sizes like we do here. We can do it here. And I just want it to show that it's possible where you are. And as we continue forth, I just feel like we're not getting the word out enough. And hopefully this podcast is getting out there. I received an email just the other day from an individual that just stumbled onto podcasts and Regenity podcast, and we were honored that he found our podcast. But more and more people's finding this avenue, and it's really nice because it's a passive avenue. Reading's active. It takes all your focus. And I love reading. The audio book, I can put a book in my ear, a podcast in my ear, while I'm out moving cattle, doing whatever.
Right.
Now,
right.
I do caution people, always take those out and just enjoy your time out there too.
Yeah.
But there's lots of times I have something going in my ear, and it's an opportunity to gather more information than I could get if I was just reading stuff.
Right.
And so I just hope we continue to grow, continue to help people take their next step, whatever that step is.
Yeah. No, and I think what you're doing is important from the standpoint of, two things. We all learn from our mistakes or our failures better, and it's cheaper if we can learn from others.
It is
failures, and then just your philosophy on, showing people they can just start wherever they're at and get moving. I think that's a cool approach.
Well, Jason, we really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Cal. Appreciate the time, and if I can be of help anywhere, sure, reach out to us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.